Good morning, students. So the purpose of this video is to help review for period 1 of the AP US History exam, APUSH exam. So this is just another resource for you to be using as you are studying for period 1. And obviously when we're talking about period 1, we're going all the way back to the beginning of the school year. With that in mind, just understand that with the APUSH guidelines, there's not going to be that much to really study from period 1. There's usually maybe one question set, maybe just one short answer. Most likely it's not going to be a DBQ question. It could be a long essay. Usually it's not a long essay choice. They usually try to go with something else. So we always have to assume that it's probably going to be a one question set or maybe a short answer. So we don't spend too much time reviewing at least this aspect of U.S. history, but we're going to dive in, and we'll do very, very brief. And once again, what I've always stressed when studying for any AP exam, especially on the social studies side, make sure that you're looking at the main ideas and studying the main ideas rather than the smaller details. Okay, when you focus too much on the smaller details, you start confusing things, and then in the long run, it's just going to be bad for you because it's not about memorization, it's about understanding the concepts and, reading comprehension, especially when it comes into the multiple choice and DBQ when you're actually reading these documents. So please keep that in mind as we're going through this. So when we're starting with period 1, we're talking about, pre-Jamestown. So everything that is happening in the United States up until about, 1605 when, Jamestown, kind of comes into this picture. So when we're talking about that, obviously we're talking about the Native Americans that have already been here, that they crossed on the land bridge, from Asia coming into what would be North America, Central and South America, okay? The way that the Native Americans kind of interacted with each other, I mean, they were definitely far apart from each other. There was definitely, places where they would be warring, but the thing is that we definitely understand about them is that it was the three sisters. Their farming that was really bringing into this picture of their, the staple of their economy, talking about beans and maize, okay, squash, all sorts of different vegetables. Things start to get a little bit, hairy once we, bring in your Spanish and your Portuguese and your conquistadors. And conquistadors, once again, meaning conquerors, people that were conquering these areas. And when we think of conquistadors, we think of our main two. One's going to be Francisco Pizarro, who's going to conquer the Incas, and the other is going to be Hernán Cortés, who's going to be conquering the Aztecs. And if we're talking about Incas and Aztecs, Incas are down in South America, right around the Andes Mountains in Peru, and the Aztecs are going to be in Mexico. In both cases, there was germs, guns, and then obviously the steel aspect of it. So we're talking about technology advances, that were able to have the Spanish and in some parts of the New World, the Portuguese, that were easily able to take over these lands. Now, a big thing that to remember is the smallpox epidemic, this germs part of everything, in which that they were spreading the smallpox throughout all of these Aztecs and even the Incas, and they were dying off. We call this exchange, now this Columbian exchange, this cultural diffusion, obviously he's named after Christopher Columbus. Remember, I know that we kind of jumped ahead with the conquistadors, but we call it the Columbian Exchange because Christopher Columbus at least introduced Europeans into the New World. Now, when we're talking about the New World, we have to keep in mind that Christopher Columbus only found Hispaniola, which is the Dominican Republic and Haiti. Okay? Columbus does not make it to what we would now know as the United States of America. Okay, and just to keep in mind, America is actually named after Amerigo Vespucci, who did the map and then named that new area after himself, and kind of gets the credit of at least naming America after himself. So, Columbus sails from Spain, in 1492. He's Italian. The Spanish Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand, sponsor him. He comes over, opens up trade or whatever, and the rest kind of goes from there, where now the Spanish want this idea of the more land and power, because land equals power, this gold, God, and glory. Okay, so we want money, we want glory, we want land, and we want, obviously, to also convert these Native Americans into Christianity. So, getting back into the Columbian Exchange, we have to remember that things are being exchanged between the Europeans and, what would be the Native Americans. In a lot of cases, there were good exchanges. We're talking about domesticated animals. We're talking about horses coming over into the New World. And then we're talking about all sorts of new fruits and vegetables that are going to be coming back from the New World into what we would deem as Europe or the Old World. Now, not every single thing was good. Like we said, there's also this idea of diseases. Whereas smallpox was coming into the New World, syphilis was going back into the Old World. So you still have positive and negative exchanges. Now, don't think that everything is a physical thing, because like we said earlier, Christianity is going to be something that's going to be exchanged, this cultural idea. So when we talk about period one, cultural diffusion and this Columbian Exchange is usually a big focus point on a lot of what's going to be happening from here on out. Now, when we're getting back into the Spanish are pretty much going to dominate North America, Central America, and South America. There's going to be a treaty where the Pope, Treaty of Tordesillas, and he draws a line in the middle of the world and says everything that's on the east of this line is going to be Portuguese, everything on the west of this line is going to be Spanish, and everybody was like, okay, but now how do we know where this line is, and how can you really defend an imaginary line and attack? So that line kind of is up to interpretation. But the Portuguese, where this line goes, it goes splits Brazil. I shouldn't say splits, it's just like a little tip of Brazil, which is why the Brazilians are the only South American country to speak Portuguese, whereas all the rest of these South and Central American countries will speak Spanish. So the Portuguese do have a presence there, but they're mostly, in the Eastern Hemisphere, Africa, some parts of Asia, and whatnot, where the Spanish are really going to be focusing on this Central and South America system. So once these conquistadors have taken control of the Native Americans, you're actually going to see that they're going to create a new type of system, or a caste system, but it's called the encomienda system, in which now there's different hierarchies depending on who you were. They go from the peninsulares, which are people that come straight over, from Spain. They were born in Europe. Then you have the Creoles, who are people, Europeans, Spanish, that were born into the New World. And then you have, mixtures of people like the mezzitos, the mulattoes, who are a mixture between Native American, African slaves or Africans, and Spanish European. And then you have the African African slaves, which will eventually be brought over because your labor during this time, these Native Americans were dying out because of diseases. And then at the very bottom, you do have the Amerindians, or the Native Americans, at the very, very bottom. So there was a caste system that was kind of put into place, which is going to be the basis of Spanish domestic economic system, for many, many, many years. Now, will there be rebellions? Absolutely. Okay, there's definitely going to be rebellions. So the Native Americans do not sit quietly at all, and there's numerous ones that you could probably add onto your short answers if this was a short answer. So just keep that in mind, that should you know maybe that the Native Americans rebelled, absolutely. Do we need to know the exact names? Probably not. Like No Noches Nista obviously would probably be the main one if we were going to go into it. So Spain is kind of the dominant force, but by the late 1500s they decide to go after England in a religious war with this Protestant Reformation that is happening, in which the Spanish lose, and it's the Spanish Armada. It's this defeat of the Spanish Armada, and they lose. And when this Spanish Armada is defeated, okay, England now starts to become more powerful. They start to, gain momentum, in which is going to be the foundation eventually of our 13 colonies, which will be in period 2 and, moving on from there. But what they do have is that they start these joint stock companies. And the best way to explain a joint stock company, at least to kind of review this, is that an individual an explorer will start to bring on investors, and these investors then will give this explorer money in exchange for anything that is brought back from the New World. And now obviously it's a gamble because you don't know what's going to happen. The sailor may bring absolutely nothing back, the explorer may die, or the explorer is going to bring back a bunch of gold. Who knows? Okay, so it's definitely going to be a gamble. So these joint stock companies, they form and they create new settlements inside of the colonies in order to try to bring some things back. One of these first colonies is going to be Roanoke, and it's the lost colony of Roanoke. Usually kind of like a little blurb that we kind of discuss, in which they leave, and then all of a sudden when they come back like 5 years later, the colony's gone, and it's just Croatoans on a tree, and no one knows what that even means, and it's this big mystery. So the English start creating, like I said, these joint stock companies in order to try to create an economic system that's going to eventually benefit them. And this is then where Jamestown is going to start, and therefore starting our period 2 review. So this was just a quick, 12-minute review just on period 1, just to kind of briefly kind of go into things again, not to go into so much detail because that's going to be more of your job, is now to kind of to connect it. But these are the main ideas that you would definitely need to know when it's coming with this AP exam. So thank you for watching, and I hope that this really does help you at least briefly cover those ideas of period 1, and I will see you next time.